I am sorry this video is late, but I was at WrestleMania last night, so I really didn't have the chance to watch Game of Thrones, but I have now, and let's get into it. So this episode starts out when we see Bran in the dream. He's walking around, and he has a bow and arrow, and he sees the three-eyed raven. He tries to shoot it, and then Jon and Robb appear over his head, like in episode 1 of the entire show, and then you hear Sean Bean's voice. That was nice. He's dead. And then he wakes up and he talks to Usha about it, but she doesn't want to hear it, so I'm just gonna go by how the story progresses for each person in the episode instead of going by how it does chronologically. Because then later on in the episode, this kid that he sees in the dream appears while Hodor and Rickon are away and Usha tries to protect him, but this kid's sister comes up behind her and then they start talking on their way to the wall about how Bran can see through animals' eyes, and that's something some people can do. It's called being a wog. I thought this was an interesting episode for Bran, because now you have these two people coming with them to the wall. It seems like they want to protect Bran. I don't know, this kid seems like an interesting character, so I want to see how that progresses next episode. And then we go back to Robb, who I think was still at Harrenhal at the time. He receives news about Winterfell and about Riverrun, that Catelyn's father died. So he's kind of sad about Winterfell, and he's told that Bran and Rickon haven't been found, so he probably thinks that they're dead. Then they start moving over to Riverrun. This guy tells Robb that he's already lost the war. Then we cut to Catelyn, and Talisa comes up to talk to her, and they talk about how... She talks about how as a child, one of her kids was sick, and if he made it through the night, he would have lived, but if he didn't, he'd die, of course. And it was Jon Snow, and she talks about how she was praying for him to die, and then she realized, oh, that's wrong, and she shouldn't, and that if he would live through the night, she would tell Ned to just give him the Stark name and she would raise him as one of her own. And he lived through the night, and then she was a bitch and didn't do it. I get that she hates herself for this, but I hate her for it too. I don't care. She's just such a bitch to Jon. I don't know why, but Jon's a cool character. She's a bitch to him. That obviously makes her a bitch. Then we see someone tied up, I don't know where, but then they take off the bag on his head, and it's Theon. He's tied up, he's being tortured. They're shoving shit underneath his nails, they're putting spikes in his feet. It's really hard to watch, even though I don't like Theon that much. And then this one guy comes up to him and says that his sister sent him and he's going to get him out of there by nightfall, and then he leaves Theon, and that's all we see for the episode. So I'm guessing Theon is probably gonna get out of this place and that his father isn't actually doing this to him, even though that's what I thought originally. And then we see Joffrey, and he's talking to Cersei about the Tyrells and if he likes them or not and what they're going to do, and he's an asshole to everyone. He's an asshole to his mom, and he doesn't really care about her opinion anymore. He started being an asshole to her last episode, and now he's just progressing on that. And then later on in the episode, he meets with Marjorie, and he starts being an ass to her, of course, about Renly and him being a traitor and gay and stuff like that. But then she starts to show her smartness again, like she did last week with something I forgot to touch on, the fact that she went to visit the poor. It shows that she's smart enough to get people on her side, and that's the whole point of going to the poor. And then Joffrey teaches her how to use this crossbow, and there's some dialogue in there that I'm guessing is going to mean something later, but I'm too stupid to recognize it right now. And a little bit earlier on in the episode, we see Shae talking to Sansa about Littlefinger and she should stay away from him and tell her if he asks her to do anything or does anything to her. And then Loras Tyrell shows up and takes Sansa to her sister and a woman named Olenna, who is Marjorie's grandmother. And Olenna asks Sansa about Joffrey and asks her to tell the truth. So she does, she kind of does. She says that he's a monster and that he promised Ned wouldn't die, and then he killed him anyway and made her look at his head. So the Tyrells are starting to realize that Joffrey is not a very good person, and I really hope that they do something about it. And then we cut back to Jon for about a minute in this episode. He's talking to Mance for a second, and they go over to this guy whose eyes look like they're rolled back and his head is just white. And it turns out that he's a wog. He's using a raven above to see where they're going. And then you cut to the Night's Watch for a minute as well. You see Sam, he's crying, he gets on his knees like, you guys left me at the wall. And they say, well, yeah, you're fat, and we wanted to live. So they pick him up. There's this guy belittling Sam too, and then Mormont comes over and says, well, if Sam dies, you're gonna die too. And then they keep walking. And then you see Ira finally, and she's walking through the forest and she sees these guys coming towards her and Gendry and the fat guy. And it turns out they're from the Brotherhood Without Banners, and they take them to this place to have a lunch or dinner, whatever it is. And while they're eating there, Ira kind of challenges the main leader of the guys to a fight. She pulls out her sword, he pulls out his and immediately knocks it out of her hand, so she kind of lost. And as they're about to leave, these guys bring in someone who has a hood over his head. They take it off and it turns out that it's the Hound, and he recognizes Ira and says, "What are you guys doing with a Stark here?" That is a terrible impression, but he recognizes that it's Ira Stark, and that's where they leave that off. So I'm pretty sure something's gonna happen with them, as I'm sure things are going to happen in next week's episode too. But yeah, I'm definitely interested in seeing where that goes, because I do like Ira a lot, and I really want to see how this Hound situation and Brotherhood Without Banners thing is gonna go. And the last thing, I wanted to save this for last so I could talk about it in full. Jaime and Brienne, we didn't get to see him last week, and I was really happy we got to see him this week. They are walking through the forest still, they're trying to get to King's Landing, and Jaime keeps wanting to talk, and he kind of keeps making jokes about Brienne, which are pretty funny. He asks Brienne how she came into helping Lady Stark, and then asks about Renly and how, and he kind of figures out that she was originally working with Renly, and that she was kind of in love with him, and that was pretty funny as a scene. And then a guy sees them, but he just keeps walking. Jaime says, "Yeah, you should probably kill that guy," and she says, "No, I won't." And later on in the episode, they're still walking, they have to cross this bridge, otherwise they'll probably get taken by the current in the river. And as they're walking, Jaime goes to sit down. I feel like he's just trying to get caught in some way, and then he gets back up, he takes Brienne's sword, cuts off the rope, and then they start fighting. And it's clear to me that Jaime wasn't at 100%, because first of all, his wrists were still essentially tied together. And he seemed like he was very weak, and Brienne eventually beats him in the fight, knocks him down. And then these guys show up. They're Bolton's men, and it seems like they're probably gonna take Jaime back to Robb at this point. But that Jaime and Brienne fight I thought was really cool, because they were just going back and forth, and then you just start seeing Jaime get worn down over the fight and then eventually getting knocked down. That was a pretty cool fight to watch. One thing I will say though, there was no Daenerys in this episode, and that was sad, because I really like her and I want to see her get a good story this season, so I really hope she's in next episode. This episode overall, it had a lot of material in it. You got to cover most of the people on the show in this episode, even if it was just for 90 seconds, and it was very enjoyable, it was interesting. The fight between Jaime and Brienne was pretty awesome. It didn't further the story all that much, so I'm gonna give this one an A- as well, like last week. It's still very fun, enjoyable, interesting. Whatever you've come to enjoy in Game of Thrones, it's probably in here. Unless you love the dragons, they're not here. So what'd you guys think of this episode of Game of Thrones? Did you enjoy it? Did you not enjoy it? Did you like it more than last week's? Write your beautiful comments down there and tell me what you think, and if you like this video, hit that subscribe button down there, because if you don't, there will never be a dragon in this show again.